afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the dedication ceremonies for the Eagle Bend Bertha-Hewitt Clarissa telecommunicasting system. This afternoon, we're presenting the formal dedication of the system, even though it has been in operation for about 4 months. During the fall and early winter, those of you who have wanted to have been able to turn to channel 45 on the UHF dial and watch many useful and interesting programs. Originally, the system was developed to be used primarily for educational purposes, but as time has gone on, the uses for a telecommunicasting system have begun to mushroom into a much bigger project. We have presented a beginning class in German from the Eagle Bend School and have just recently planned for a class on mass media, which will be taught from the Bertha-Hewitt schools. We have also presented programming in the area of athletics, including volleyball, football, boys and girls basketball, wrestling, and a coach's corner. There have also been many local programs which have included Veterans Day programs, choir and band concerts, workshops, and many other areas of interest. It is planned that in the upcoming days we'll be expanding our programming to include other classroom offerings and other topics of local interest. We've also been fortunate to be able to broadcast many pre-prepared programs such as Sesame Street, The Electric Company, and 321 Contact, all of which cater to younger children. The dedication ceremony this afternoon, which we are going to be presenting, will include presentations from many of the people that have helped make telecommunicasting a reality. We will be beginning the ceremony this afternoon with a few introductory remarks from Mr. Will James, the Superintendent of Schools here at Eagle Bend. This will be followed by our national anthem played by the Eagle Bend High School Band under the direction of Mr. Don Harris. Mr. James will then be introducing Mr. Keith Larson to you. Mr. Larson is representing the Federal Communications Commission out of Washington, D.C. Mr. Larson is the chief engineer in charge of Low Power Inquiry, the group which investigated and made approval on this program. Next, we will be hearing from the Bertha-Hewitt School Band under the direction of Mr. Ken Nelson, as they will be playing the drum major song, which happens to be the Bertha-Hewitt fight song. Our next guest will be Mr. Ed Pillar from Syosset, New York, who is the originator of the Comunicasting program. He is an electrical engineer for the Fairchild Industries, who first developed the idea of low-cost, low-frequency broadcasting way back in 1958. 23 years later, Mr. Pillar is going to be watching a dream come true. Mr. Pillar has worked and played with the uses of radio and TV technology and has been interested in helping keep this idea alive through its operational use. Dr. Lee Cohen of the Case Institute for Research in New York City will be the next speaker. It was Dr. Cohen that, together with Mr. Pillar, first requested and began to circulate the ideas of using this type of a system for educational purposes and also preventing the UHF frequencies from being lost to commercial usage. They filed petitions with the FCC to allow the use of low-power two-way broadcast that we have put to use in our system. After Dr. Cohen, we will be hearing the Clarissa fight song as played by the Clarissa High School Band, directed by Mr. Johansson. Our next two speakers will be Mr. Roland Klitsky and Mr. Larry Brinsfield, who are the two instructors that have been involved so far in the Comunicasting project. Mr. Klitsky has been teaching a beginning German class this fall, and Mr. Brinsfield is now in the process of placing a class in mass media available to the 3 schools and interested community members. The Eagle Bend High School Band will then play the Eagle Bend school song, The Spirit of '76, to be followed by the formal ribbon cutting of the new system. Cutting the ribbon to officially open our system is so far a surprise. As of yet, we do not know who will be cutting the ribbon, but it will be cut. Superintendent James will then be ending this afternoon's ceremony with a few closing remarks, and that will conclude this afternoon's programming. Just a short background of the Comunicasting for Educational Purposes, or CEP program, would probably be of help to you. In 1978, when the idea of telecommunicasting was first published in this area, it came to the attention of Eagle Bend High School principal, Mr. Richard Lundgren. With the declining enrollments of the rural school systems and the increased cost of education, The idea of a low-cost alternative sounded good, and Mr. Lundgren began making inquiries to the possibilities of using these ideas in our area. What he found was that the idea fit us to a T, although I doubt he realized all the work that would be involved before the system would be operational. TV had long been used as an educational tool, but before this time there'd always been a major problem, and that was a lack of spontaneity between the programming and those who were viewing it. The programs were also very expensive and often not suited to use in all systems. Then the communication idea came along that we know as Comunicasting. It's based not on one-way programming coming to the viewer, but rather on two-way communication, putting the student in direct contact with the instructor or leader. It seemed like a great idea, but there was still a lot of work to be done. After presenting the idea to the Bertha-Hewitt superintendent, Mr. Earl James, and their board, and to Superintendent Herb Wolf and the Clarissa Board of Education, it was decided to look into the possibility of financing and getting approval for this project. More time elapsed, and the Joint Powers Board was selected, 2 members from each school board, plus the 3 superintendents, who were charged with overseeing the project. Funding was then acquired from many sources, including the Title IV-C funding, Reader's Digest, Woodland Cooperative, the Northwest Foundation, XU5, which stands for the Educational Cooperation Service Unit, directed by Mr. Dick Hegry out of Staples. Funding was also granted by the MARDAG Foundation of Minnesota and the Minnesota Rural Development Council, the Minnesota Council for Quality Education, the University of Georgia, KCMT-TV out of Alexandria, KSTP out of Minneapolis, and WDSE out of Duluth. Another concern was the preparation of the local teaching staff, which was done by having workshops on the local level. And later on, the last major hurdle was the securing of experimental approval by the FCC. Being the one and only project like it of its kind, it posed some unique questions, and a great deal of time and effort was taken in convincing the FCC of the merit of the project. When the approval was granted in January of 1980, the project was ready to go, and that brings us through the present. One interesting feature of this afternoon's dedication will be the actual use of the system, as the Bertha-Hewitt and Clarissa bands will be playing their school songs from their separate and respective gymnasiums, and the sound and picture will be broadcast to you, the viewers, as well as to those in attendance at the ceremonies. Handling the cameras and technical duties today are Craig Stevenson, the program's technical advisor, John Eckel, Herman Froelich, and Norston Fontaine in Eagle Bend, Bob Schwartz, Glenn Wood, Jack Henninger and Bertha-Hewitt, and Forey Wilson and Clarissa. One feature of the whole program that intrigued all of us from the beginning was that local people would be capable of operating the equipment necessary for the program. So far, a number of very responsible high school students have proven to be very capable in learning the necessary skills to keep the project running smoothly. Another point of interest this afternoon might be the news agencies that have come to help cover the dedication of our system. We have representatives with us this afternoon from KCMT-TV in Alexandria, WCCO-TV in Minneapolis-St. Paul, KWAD Radio in Wadena, the Minneapolis Tribune, as well as the local Eagle Bend newspaper. In the background you can hear music which is being played for you this afternoon by Carolyn Harris, a senior at Eagle Bend High School. And you can also hear the growing noise of the crowd. The dignitaries are now coming on to the stage. Again, we will be turning to the opening remarks by Superintendent James, and here he comes right now.
Bertha-Hewitt School, are you ready? Bertha-Hewitt School, are you ready? Yeah! Clarissa School, are you ready? Well, we know the system is working. And ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness the beginning of a new chapter in the history of television broadcasting and in the educational delivery systems. Station KG2XCB, Channel 45, is on the air. Thank you, Eagle Bend Band. Now, I'd like to take a moment to recognize some of the dignitaries who are here today to help celebrate this event with us. In the audience, we have Deputy Commissioner of Education, Von Valletta. Would you please stand up? Thank you. Senator and Mrs. Merton Wagner. Tom Upman, Todd Communications. Vern Mazurek. Are you here, Vern? Well, he's around. And here on stage, we have Keith Larson from the FCC, Ed Pillar from New York, Dr. Lee Cohen from New York and the Case Institute, Roland Klitsky, a teacher involved in Comunicasting, and Larry Brinsfield, a teacher from Bertha. There's a small sign on in the cafe downtown which points out that there isn't much to see in a small town, but what you hear makes up for it. Ladies and gentlemen, I expect that what you see and hear the next several hours in this small town could very well make a big difference in your life. Our immediate purpose right now is to celebrate the reality of the achievement of our goals first fashioned 2.5 years ago. We envisioned the fulfillment of a dream first fashioned by two collaborators, geniuses in their own right, Ed Pillar and Dr. Lee Cohen. Their dream has taken 23 years to fruition. It's been a terrific struggle to come to where we are today for these two men. But now, before I preempt whatever they may have to say, I'd like to call Keith Larson, engineer from the FCC, to step to the podium for a few remarks.
Well, this is a great day for the people of Eagle Bend, Clarissa, Bertha-Hewitt, all of Minnesota, and all of rural America. Today you are dedicating what may be the smallest television broadcast station in the continental United States, and I feel privileged to be here to share this happy occasion with you. While small in size, your station is very large in stature and has factored significantly into the FCC's efforts for improved television service in rural America. On behalf of the Federal Communications Commission, I wish to welcome KG2XCB to the airwaves and to congratulate you on your efforts. You have overcome many regulatory hurdles to get this far with your station. And you are pioneers. You are true pioneers, both in the field of education and in broadcasting. You know, perhaps many people, including some of my colleagues back in Washington, doubted that you could come this far. The leaders of your school districts, Superintendents Wolf of Clarissa, Matheson of Bertha-Hewitt, and James of Eagle Bend, and in particular, Principal Lundgren of Eagle Bend, should be commended for their dedication to this undertaking and their exemplary cooperation with the FCC. During every step of the licensing process, they have more than met our requirements. About 2 years ago, I recall Dick Lundgren and others coming to us seeking advice on how to obtain an FCC license. I recall writing him about a 6-page letter with at least 25 different filing requirements. And let me assure you, obtaining a television license is nothing like sending in a cereal box top. Mr. Lundgren conscientiously ensured that all of these requirements were met, if not exceeded. It was a pleasure working with him. And I also want to applaud your school boards, teachers, and especially the students for their role in this, and also the community members. And of course, special recognition should be given to Mr. Zed Pillar and Dr. Lee Cohen of the City College of New York, whom many consider to be the father of Comunicasting. Lee and Ed, I'm very happy that you're with us today. Today, I also wear a second hat. I grew up in Minnesota, in the small town of Argyle, to your northwest, population of about 700 people. As a child, I recall that I could watch one and sometimes two television channels. During this time, cable TV and TV translators were just beginning to emerge and hadn't reached Argyle yet. So as a transplanted rural American, I'm proud of what is being done here in Eagle Bend, Bertha-Hewitt, and Clarissa. I hope and expect that your station will be a glowing model that other towns may wish to follow. The FCC is now in the middle of a very important rulemaking proceeding concerning low-power television broadcasting, which, according to FCC Chairman Charles Ferris, offers the same intriguing possibilities as the advent of commercial TV broadcasting in the late 1940s. The Commission, in September of this past year, put out some highly innovative proposals which, if ultimately adopted into rules, will make it possible for smaller communities to have mini television stations at perhaps 5% or less of the construction costs of a conventional station. Such stations would be similar in some respects to this experimental UHF station here in Eagle Bend. These stations would operate at a much reduced power level than that of the conventional station and accordingly would have a smaller viewing range, perhaps a maximum range of about 15 to 30 miles at most. These stations would be considered secondary to the conventional stations in two respects. First, a new conventional station would be entitled to take the channel used by a low-power station in the same area if it chose to do so. The low-power station operator would then need to either select another channel in which to operate, cease operating altogether, or could apply for a license for the more costly conventional station. Secondly, low-power stations would not be permitted to interfere physically with the reception of a conventional station, but must accept any such interference from some such stations. These conditions, by the way, also apply to the experimental license to operate your station at Eagle Bend. The secondary status of low-power stations is necessary, and it accomplishes two very important things. First, it allows for the unimpeded growth of conventional stations in rural America, stations like KCMT in Alexandria. Secondly, because of their secondary status, the Commission felt that it could relax or totally eliminate many of the legal, financial, and technical regulations that apply now to conventional stations. Indeed, these regulations partially account for the high construction and operating costs of conventional stations. It is easy to understand why there are so few conventional stations in small towns. Simply the cost. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, in a recent proceeding, has told us at the FCC that the startup costs for a medium-sized conventional station is about $2 million. To meet these expenses and to realize a profit, commercial broadcasters engage in the business of selling audiences to advertisers, while non-commercial stations depend on program sponsorship and pledges from the members. Normally, rural areas have lacked the population density to support conventional stations. While the three commercial networks and public TV are often supplied by cable TV or TV repeating devices known as translators, rural communities have not had an opportunity to enjoy local programming, as was the intent of the FCC when it established its television channel allotments plan back in the early 50s. I was at a convention recently where I was told by a fellow from Wyoming that the western half of Wyoming cannot receive Wyoming local news, rather they get it from Utah. The same is true down in where my parents live, in the southwestern corner of the state. Prior to their cable system coming into being down there, they had to content themselves with news from South Dakota. So there is definitely a need for more localism. The low-power TV concept is built upon the well-proven idea of the television translator. It's a device that receives a TV signal, amplifies it, and retransmits it on a different channel. There are about 4,000 of these devices licensed in the United States today. They operate in both the VHF and UHF bands. About 70% of the translators operate in mountainous states such as Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. Here they have proven to be about the only practical means of delivering television service. While many Minnesota communities enjoy cable television also, there are about 100 translators in Minnesota at last count, some of which are used, by the way, to relay Minneapolis stations to some of the cable systems around the state. And the activity is growing in Minnesota. Recently, Hubbard Broadcasting has applied for 30 translators to relay its programs throughout the state of Minnesota, KSTP, and other stations may also do that. Your station at Eagle Bend, by the way, centers around the use of a TV translator. The FCC rules now limit the usefulness of translators. Translators must carry the programs of other primary TV stations, and they are not allowed to originate their own programming other than 30 seconds per hour for the purpose of soliciting funds and acknowledging funds for the operation of the station. Now, it's been long recognized that translators could be used far more effectively by allowing them to be used as mini stations. That is, if you plug in a modulator to the translator, you have then a transmitter. If you add a camera or a video recorder to that system, you have a mini station. And that is about all that would be necessary for the most simplistic of stations. And such a station may cost on the order of about $25,000 to $50,000 to $100,000, depending on the sophistication. Now, the goal of the FCC in the low-power television proceeding was to allow small communities, such as Eagle Bend, Clarissa, and Bertha-Hewitt, to tailor their communication systems to their local resources and needs. Flexibility is clearly the key. The FCC, in its staff report here, of which I was privileged to have a small part, has proposed a number of items which we think will be very beneficial in the development of low-power television broadcasting in rural Americas. We have proposed flexibility concerning the type of station. A translator station may operate full-time as a translator station, merely repeating the signal of some other television station. Alternatively, it may act as a low-power station, and it may originate programming to an unlimited extent. Eagle Bend is acting purely as a local station right at the moment. Or there could be a combination of the two. The station may act as a translator part of the time, for instance, relaying the public broadcasting network, and may act as a local station another part of the time. The only thing that is necessary here is appropriate agreements between the local parties and those of the stations who are being relayed. Secondly, we have looked for flexibility in the type of programming. Commercial programming could be mixed with non-commercial programming or local programming. And finally, we have looked for flexibility in financing. One of the big problems with translators over the years has been there's been very little financial incentive to operate them, and most have been operated on a volunteer basis. And that is because commercial advertising has not been allowed, nor has subscription television, pay television. The FCC has proposed to rectify this by allowing a wide range of financing schemes, such as local advertising for profit during the local program origination time. Also, subscription television, which is now the domain of the full-service station in some of the large cities, has been proposed for low-power stations without limitation. And finally, taxing districts are another financing scheme which are used particularly in about 20 of the western states, where the state legislators have enacted legislation that would allow local communities to set up television taxing districts. And this has proved very successful in some of these states. So flexibility is the key, and the FCC has proposed to do what it can to stimulate rural television, particularly local television operated by local people. And there are some examples in Minnesota that I find very heartwarming. Eagle Bend, of course, is making history today, and it's a thrill to be a part of that. Also, there's been an application filed for Bemidji, Minnesota, to put in a low-power station there, which I'm told may carry an independent station part of the time as a translator, may carry local programs another part of the time, and also may carry subscription television a third part of the time. And we've tried to do this in a manner that will not impose new burdensome requirements on small communities. For instance, unlike conventional television stations, the Commission has recommended that no minimum hours be put on low-power stations. There would be no requirements to have a formal studio. No minimum number of hours for local programming. It would pretty much be up to the local people, the local operator. And again, as I say, one of the highlights of this is the cost. It's a cost that I think is affordable. A cost of perhaps $25,000 for a UHF translator, and maybe another $20,000 to $25,000 for low-power features to have a mini station. People have been asking for a chance to do this for years. Ed Pillar and Lee Cohen have sought this. Other educators have sought this. In our notice of inquiry, we received about 75 comments from people around the country, and the majority of these had to do with low-power community broadcasting, the concept of Comunicasting. Comunicasting involves two-way television. Now, we don't have a true Comunicasting system here yet, as Ed Pillar will tell you. We have a low-power broadcasting system which could be adapted to Comunicasting if there were enough frequencies available. The Commission has not yet taken that second step, and one of the reasons why is because we're watching Eagle Bend here to see how it can work. Many people are watching your system with eager anticipation around the state of Minnesota and around the country. I know wherever I'm invited to speak, I talk about Eagle Bend, and You've been warmly received by many people in the communication industry. They have a lot of respect and admiration for what you've done. I'm pleased with what I have seen today, particularly the dedication of your leaders and the support of the members of your community. Both of these ingredients are essential for a successful broadcasting station in small towns. I thank you for inviting me to participate in the dedication of your station, and I wish your continued success in your television broadcasting efforts. And I have just one final announcement. It's very timely. The FCC met this morning to consider 3 petitions for rulemaking that would in effect put a freeze on low-power licensing activities until final rules have been adopted. I'd like to tell you that the Commission has denied that request for a freeze and that low-power licensing activity will continue. The one proviso is that a multiple ownership limitation, that is 15 stations around the country per licensee during the interim process, or the interim period here, has been also adopted. But we also have a rulemaking out, as I indicated, and the period for filing comments on the notice of proposed rulemaking and low-power television proceeding is January the 15th. The period for filing reply comments is March the 15th. Now, this is your opportunity to let the Commission know at this stage of the rulemaking, as Eagle Bend did in the previous stage, what you want. I thank you for allowing me to be here today.
I'd like to back up a little bit from the regular schedule. As I sat there looking at the audience, I was horrified to realize that I'd failed to recognize a few people who should be recognized. They are 2 men who led us step by step through this whole process with the FCC. Howard Braun and Russell Balch. I'd like to also point out to you that all the cameras, most of the technical equipment in this school, in the Clarissa school, and in the Bertha-Hewitt school is being run at this moment by students. There's one right there. I think that's a great beginning for this kind of a system. Student involvement is important. Now we'll hear from the Bertha-Hewitt Band. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you and ask to the podium the grandfather of Comunicasting, the mastermind of technical information and expertise, Ed Pillar.
Thank you, Mr. James, and all the people assembled here today in Eagle Bend. Today is an extremely proud moment of my life because it represents the beginning of the fulfillment of a dream I've had for some 23 years now. I'd like to go into some of the history of Comunicasting and how it all came about. First of all, I should tell you a little about myself and the things that led me to do what I am doing today. At the age of 14, I visited a cousin and saw a crystal set in operation for the first time. And here he was pulling in radio stations without batteries, just a tuning coil, an antenna, and headphones. I went home, got my mother's rolling pin, and wound turns of copper on it, turned it into a tuning coil, hooked an antenna or a crystal detector to it, and headphones, and pretty soon I was tuning across the broadcast band. Pretty soon I heard amateur radio operators on the 160-meter phone band. This was back in the late 1930s. They were communicating with each other over long distances. I'd hear the local station but would not hear the far distant one. I decided that was a hobby for me. One thing led to another, and one of the proudest moments of my life was when at the age of 16 I got my amateur radio license, which I've had to this date with the same call letters, W2KPQ. I feel that it is through the world of amateur radio that I got my start in the Comunicasting field and generated my professional goal in life. I went to school, graduated college as an electronic engineer, did some work in war industry, was in the Army, worked with military uses of television, and on leaving the Army in 1948, I went to work for the central engineering staff of the National Broadcasting Company, where we were tasked at that time with planning and building television stations in many parts of the country. It was a truly great experience to work on pioneer installations at the Empire State Building on the multiple antenna system, to put in a Channel 5 installation in Chicago from the Civic Opera Building, to push the button and get reports within 10 minutes of signals coming in loud and clear 50 miles away. To me, one of the greatest pleasures in my life is to utilize the radio spectrum to bring happiness to people, to bring knowledge to people, and all kinds of interactive communications. I stayed with National Broadcasting Company for about 11 years, and while I was there, I felt there was a further need, that the radio spectrum should not be used just for the one-way transmission of communications, such as in broadcasting, but somewhere along the line we should allow a party line where people could talk back, just as we did on amateur radio services. We would communicate to all parts of the United States and all parts of the world, and it was indeed a pleasure to wake up in the morning, turn on a rotary beam, aim a transmitter at South Africa or New Zealand, and have the signals come back to me. I recall putting up large antenna systems to do this. In the middle 50s, I read about a group up at the Albany Medical College that started what I consider to be the first communicasting system in the country. A group of doctors at the Albany Medical College for postgraduate education would discuss a medical topic while in direct radio communication with 21 hospitals and outlying communities. It started by the help of a group of radio amateurs. There must have been about 70 of them that participated in that service. They demonstrated the need to be able to use the radio spectrum for interactive communication that all people could listen to and profit from the experience. Following that, I decided, well, let's try something close to the amateur frequencies. Fortunately, we had an emergency military communication system called MARS, Military Affiliate Radio System, which was a backup emergency communication for the Army. In the event of an emergency, they would resort, if their main communications were knocked out, they would handle messages through amateur radio participants, of which today there are some 360,000 all over the United States. Operating on single sideband transmission on the First Army Command Channel of 40-30 kilohertz, in January 1958, we came on the air with a highly publicized network. It went out in 7 popular electronic magazines and communication journals. We scheduled 1 speaker a week. We took 2 hours a night on Wednesday evenings. We would assemble a group of stations from New York, New Jersey, and all the New England states, and the speaker would come on from one of the originating systems or stations that were in Boston, Schenectady, New Jersey, Fort Monmouth, and Long Island. The speaker would present a talk, half hour, 40 minutes. Occasionally he would stop and ask for questions. Stations would call in from all over. And at the same time, on the same channel, people would be tuned in and listening to this. This was the first attempt at Comunicasting, and we had a skywave audience that covered out to 1,000 to 1,500 miles. From the New York area, we got letters from kids in college up in Iowa, Grinnell, Iowa. Up in Canada, we got letters from Air Force men in the Azores who were listening to these, all urging us to continue. At any rate, the thing ran for 3 years. We had, must have presented about 70 speakers. We initiated experiments with slow scan television to supplement the oral communications. And we instigated and tried various other techniques to enhance the subject matter, such as sending around advanced published diagrams and things like that. At any rate, following that, I became involved in military electronics and government communication. And I might add that the techniques which go into building beautiful entertainment and educational communication systems can be used to deny communication to the enemy of the United States. I've been earning my living, and I might add, I'm proud of what I'm doing, although I don't feel the satisfaction that I did in putting on entertainment and education by working in the electronic warfare branch, where we generate all kinds of devices using electrical and physical properties that we've learned to enhance communication, to deny an enemy communication or radar access of location of targets that he might want to intercept. Feeling that there was a need, a vast vacuum in an educational group, of which there are many in the Washington area, nobody seemed to understand the allocation structure and a need for frequencies for the cost-effective frequencies, I should say, for educational radio. We felt that somewhere along the line, people should learn the technology, the spectrum, how line-of-sight waves travel and what frequencies, how the skip travels, and you can get global communication, the differences between troposcatter, single sideband, microwave, and all the technologies that are important to a real understanding of how a communication system works and to tailor it to your needs. Now, in the I would say in the early 60s, I was commuting to work, and we put mobile radios in our car. They were single sideband, and either we could talk for a distance of about 15 or 20 miles to other people as we went to work, or we can get on the air and transmit signals to Europe, to South America, even got them to Guam and South Pole when conditions were right. And we formed a club dedicated to the improvement of multiple mobile radio communication in the New York area. From that, we went on to FM repeater operation, which actually takes a signal as a translator. It's put at a high location on a building or a tower. It picks up a low-power signal and rebroadcasts it on another frequency, and it covers a wide area. I have with me something I call a teddy bear. Teddy bear, this one, goes from the days when I was a youngster. I always carried a teddy bear around with me, and I adored it. This little teddy bear is my voice to the world. As I travel through the United States, it's a 1.5 watt output, works off of chargeable batteries. It puts out signals on 800 channels here, and these channels can be picked up according to a directory put out by the American Radio Relay League of Newington, Connecticut, which is a key organization in amateur radio. From this, I have found that I could go anywhere in the United States and meet people. I have put my signals through repeaters on Squaw Mountain and Pikes Peak in Colorado, which reach out 150 miles or more. That little 1.5 watts. In fact, you can even pick up signals from satellites on devices like this and even transmit to them if the antennas at the satellite are properly tuned to you. From this background, we set up from a tower in Belmore, New Jersey, sponsored by the Long Island Mobile Amateur Radio Club. We set up a technical net which worked on a VHF frequency. We would invite a speaker from the locality. One night a week, we would assemble a group of members on channel, and we would present the speaker. He would give his subject, and people would call in from all over the metropolitan area and be heard by everyone else in the metropolitan area. And there was tremendous interest in it. We found one of the things we needed was a visual medium. So I volunteered somehow to become chairman of our amateur television committee, sometimes called ATV. We built down my basement laboratory the first 100-watt television transmitter. We got permission through the Syosset School District on Long Island to operate this from the Rockville Center Diocesan Tower with their amateur radio stations. And we demonstrated to the community a means of tying 3 school districts together on amateur frequencies to a television repeater and also to people in the community who were also equipped with low-power 10-watt television terminals. And I'm not talking about terminals that cost thousands of dollars. I'm talking something, if you build it, you could do it with surplus radios that used to transmit FM from mobile taxi cabs and things like that. We'd convert them for $50 and get a surplus camera and put that on for $100, you'd have a whole terminal. We later demonstrated that you could use purchased solid-state 10-watt transmitters to do the same thing. I happened to meet Dr. Lee Cohn at one of our amateur radio group picnics, and I was raising money by selling bumper stickers, $1 a sticker, to support your ATV fund, and we needed maybe a total of $2,000 to come on the air first class. Lee says, hey, you know, that's a tremendous thing you're doing. Let's get together and see if we can do something about it. At any rate, we generated a petition. We petitioned the FCC for a new community educational radio service, fixed service, which we call the SERFs petition, an acronym which we think is apropos. The SERFs are trying to regain the use of the spectrum. We got a tremendous response. We got backup from our local senators, other people in high offices who sent in letters to the FCC, and before you know it, they came out with a rulemaking procedure, RM 2846. They asked for comments, and comments came in far and wide from the educational community of the need for something like this. The FCC later came up with a docket 78-253 for low-power television. They denied our request for 14 channels, but claimed that it was an innovative service which could show considerable benefit in the overall scheme of things, and we're opening the doors for applicants who are willing to experiment and put up a licensed station, FCC-sponsored station. Fortunately, Eagle Bend came to our rescue. They were the only group in the country who were cognizant enough of what this could do for rural telecommunications. They came forward, and somehow, I don't know how, they got the thing funded, because that has always been the major stumbling block in educational radio and television. The rules and regulations of the FCC, with all due pardon for me saying so, have effectively emasculated educational radio, because they have, to this date, divorced it from the ability to use their transmission facilities to raise funding. Fortunately, I see from Keith's remarks that these things are changing, and they're looking to ways that educational groups can raise funding through that and other systems. However, they've opened the door at this point a little too wide. There are groups, national groups, that are applying for 140 channels. They want to come into your backyard, take up your television channels, and purvey to you once in a while a good movie by coded transmissions, many times a B film, lots of porno and X-rated stuff. This is what's going to be coming over the public highways if a damper is not put in on this thing. And I respectfully request the educational community to come forward, to make their voices known. They've always been fragmented. They've never gotten together. But if ever education in these United States is going to advance, now is the time that the educational community must make their feelings known. And the docket is 78-253. There is a notice of inquiry at the FCC. You send an original and 5 copies to them and get it in the mail by January 15th. Get it to them by January 15th, because if you don't, your spectrum will be invaded by many people you won't want to, that you'll have to pay, where you're getting free television, or you could use these channels for education. You're going to get a lot of coded signals that in order to decode them, you're going to have to pay someone $19 a month or something like that for each signal. Already 21 of our channels has been given over to the Land Mobile Service because there was never an effective defense that was mounted by anyone to offset the inrush onto the channels. There are 21 channels on my TV set at home that will never light up. The influx of all the pay TV signals that will be coming on the air will further damage that. Not that I'm against pay TV. I think it should be thoroughly regulated, and the FCC should go slow in granting construction permits, and they should give the educators, who normally take a year or two to get their budgets together, adequate time to assess the situation and see how educational television will work for them. In the rural areas, there's plenty of spectrum. They don't mind if you broadcast to sparse population, the woodchucks and the herds of cattle and what have you. However, in the 100 major markets and the subsidiary cities, there is a tremendous demand for audience and high competition for these channels, and there are companies with millions of dollars who are going after this system to invade your house or invade your public roadways with pay TV signals. Make your feelings known. Please do. With that, I want to thank you very much.
I almost forgot the worst forget I ever forgot. We have with us here the Joint Powers Board of Education, and by all means, they should be recognized. They've been very understanding and worked very cooperatively with us since the beginning of this experiment, and we've enjoyed having them. Chairman of that group is Gene Lindquist. Vice Chairman of that group is Dennis Rounds. Secretary Glenn Line. And directors Bob Boudin, Adrian Johnson, and Dean Hetland. And I should also like to point out that the board members from each of the 3 school districts are present. Because of time, I'll not introduce you. I hope you'll forgive me. I'll find out later. Dr. Lee Cohen, Director of Research, Case Institute, City College of New York. An educator, a visionary, a dynamic leader who was very instrumental with Ed Pillar in bringing Comunicasting to fruition. Dr. Lee Cohen.
I was a young man when Ed Pillar started speaking. I feel free to say something like that about Ed. I've known him for some time, sometimes to my chagrin, because he is a dynamic individual who has given considerably of himself in this venture. There's very little that I can say at this point. People who know me back home know that I'm seldom at a loss for words. I feel very humble and very proud at the same time, and very, very apologetic for not being able to have done this back home. I'm jealous of Eagle Bend. You've heard the story. I needn't go into it in any depth. I was concerned that educational television was not going anywhere, and yet education must inevitably begin to avail itself of the new technologies in order to keep pace, in order to ensure that we can continue to provide for publics that wish to be served the kind of education they do deserve, with increased costs, with any number of other concerns that I won't go into at this moment. It is going to be more and more difficult without the technologies that that are available to us now and hopefully will be available to us in the future. I'd like to make one thing clear by virtue of a little anecdote. It seems that the research angel went up to St. Peter and said, you know, we have no information about how many people there are on Earth who know a good deal about interactive television, who are experts in the field. And St. Peter said, really, you better go down and do some research and find out just how many people there are. And after 6 weeks, the research angel returned and said, we have the answer now. The survey I've done indicates that there were 7 people who are expert in interactive television. And St. Peter said, really, only 7 people? Under those circumstances, perhaps we'd better do something nice for them. Why don't we make up a nice plaque and send it to them? And that's what they did. Do you know what the plaque said? I don't know either. I never received one of those plaques. I'm not an expert. I'd like to make that known, nor did I invent anything. But what I did do is find a man who was somewhat expert in the area, Ed Pillar. I was aware that what we needed to improve upon what I perceive to be the talking head, that is a bust shot of somebody speaking into a television, one-way transmission, presumably providing intelligence, oftentimes providing it, but perhaps in a stultifying fashion. And I knew we could improve upon that. I also knew that there were many disenfranchised populations throughout the United States and elsewhere, people who could not avail themselves of educational opportunities for one reason or another. Perhaps women at home with small children who could not leave their homes and go to school. Perhaps the aged who were too infirm to be able to get to an educational location. Perhaps homebound handicapped youths who deserved every opportunity but were deprived of that because they could not be mobile enough to get to an educational institution. And it occurred to me that perhaps we've been locked into a frame of reference that's totally without reason. We simply perceive education as a product that can be delivered within a classroom and nowhere else. Well, all of you know that you've received education from your parents, you've received education from your friends, from your neighbors, and occasionally from your enemies. And this kind of education takes place outside of the classroom. Why could not other kinds of education take place outside the classroom? And perhaps in your own local community, without having to transport yourself 30 or 40 miles to a university. Another reason, incidentally, why I was interested. We oftentimes have to close out classes because of insufficient enrollment. But that's only because there are insufficient numbers of people who are able to register for a particular course at a particular time in a particular location. Individuals who might readily be available may be too far and would have to commute too long a distance over too great a period of time to make it in time. Well, through Comunicasting, through the ability to provide interactive television, we will be able to serve such populations. In any event, I did speak to Ed Pillar, and I would warn you, never buy a bumper sticker from Ed Pillar. That was 5 years ago, ladies and gentlemen. More than 5 years ago, I guess. And he has had me working for him ever since. We generated a number of articles for educational magazines, journals, or professional journals of one kind or another. The attempt was to encourage the public to respond to our petition to increase the availability of frequencies in the UHF range for the purpose that I've described. It was a long, hard road to hoe. And as Ed indicated, the FCC, forgive me, Keith, the FCC was none too encouraging at the beginning. But because the need was there, and because we could justify what we were doing, because there were sufficient publics who were willing to write in, the FCC was impressed. They did declare our petition moot in light of the fact that they opened up a full notice of inquiry, but now you see what the notice of inquiry has yielded. Keith has given you an excellent overview of what has happened. We're very, very proud. But most of all, we're proud of what you've done here at Eagle Bend, Clarissa, Bertha-Hewitt. It's one thing to configure an idea. It's another thing to bring it to fruition. Richard Lundgren, Will James, Dick Hegry, they came to New York City. And they thought they were imposing upon me. I was taking advantage of them, I really was. I was, I suppose, selling them on an idea, a dream, never quite realizing that they would bring that dream to fruition, but willing to tell anyone who would listen. And incidentally, I would warn you, if you collar me, if you get me off to a side somewhere, be careful, because I'm liable to bend your ear for hours. I believe in this, truly. I think that this is one of the most powerful tools there is, and I must have communicated something like this to Richard, to Will, because they began and fought for some 2.5 years, perhaps, to this point. I've taken too much of your time. I appreciate your having invited me. I thank you for bringing one of my most cherished thoughts to fruition. It gives me great pride, and I wish you well. I commit myself, and I know Ed does too, to any assistance we might give any additional communities to bring their dreams to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen and Ed Pillar. Now we'll hear a selection from the Clarissa Band. Thank you, Clarissa Band. You were great. We have two teachers who have been very willing to commit themselves and to participate in Comunicasting. They've had to have a lot of courage to do this, to expose themselves to the public through Comunicasting in their teaching process. We have to feel indebted to them. We have to feel proud of them. And we have to admire the courage. And we have to stand in awe at the nice job they've done. We have one who teaches German, one who teaches a class in mass communications. The German class emanates here in Eagle Bend. Mass communication emanates from Bertha. Mr. Klitsky, would you like to tell us a few things about your experience?
Meine Herrschaften, es ist ja selbstverständlich, ganz unmöglich, Ihnen zu erklären, wie ganz dankbar ich bin, ein paar Wörter über Comunicasting in Deutsch zu sagen. Ladies and gentlemen, it is absolutely impossible to tell you how grateful I am to be able to say a few words about Comunicasting German 1. Mesdames et messieurs, comme un coup de tonnerre, ces réseaux de transmission sont pareils du monde entier. What we are doing, this method, will be like a clap of thunder heard around the world. Señoras y señores, no he dado contado en ese asunto. Con razón, picamos muy alto. We are just beginning, to be sure, but let us shoot for the stars. Unfortunately, I have to continue with an indictment which comes from a report released recently by the President's Commission on Foreign Languages and International Studies. Americans' incompetence in foreign languages is nothing short of scandalous, and it is becoming worse. Our schools graduate a large majority of students whose knowledge and vision stops at the American shoreline, whose approach to international affairs is provincial, and whose heads have been filled with astonishing misinformation. As a teacher of German for the last 14 years, I've been witnessing a continuing decline of students who sign up not just for German class, but other foreign languages as well. Who is to blame, you ask? You could blame the educational system, whether it's the higher or lower levels. You could blame both of them. That would be easy. But you got to remember, if you place the blame there, you're blaming yourselves, because our schools are a reflection of you. What can we do about it? I think Comunicasting, at least, is an effort. I found it ironic, as an interpreter and instructor of German in Germany for 3 years, to see men, young men, by the thousands, spend 18 months there and never get off the post. It was exceptional. The German vocabulary went beyond the Max nix, ein Bier bitte stage. I had many examples, but we are running short of time. But I think I made it clear to you that I believe in this. And if we don't do something about it, we will have an example which just happened. On December 23rd, it was announced to the world that the Japanese have now passed us in the world production and sales of automobiles. Why? For one reason, though obviously there are many. Japanese businessmen who deal in other countries are required to be proficient in that particular language, while Americans who deal abroad are generally nearly totally incompetent in foreign languages. It is not only our language ignorance, but our ignorance of other people themselves, of their history, and their cultures that could lead to our own destruction. Die Antwort, mein Freund, weht mit dem Wind. Sie müssen lernen, die Sprache des Windes zu verstehen. Somewhere there's an answer. We've got to learn that answer. I do not have the foresight, although I wish I did, to predict whether or not we at Eagle Bend and Bertha-Hewitt and Clarissa will be able to retain our Comunicasting system. Certainly I hope we will. I promise all of you we will do our best to continue doing what we are. We are We have, however, proven one thing already. The system works. That was a primary goal. And in all humility, we are all exceptionally proud of that fact. I cannot also say that Americans' lack of foreign languages can be cured by utilizing this system. After 1.5 years of working with this system, I can say it works with foreign languages. With all my years of experience, this is the most innovative thing I've ever been a part of. And I'm very grateful to Mr. Lundgren for asking me 2.5 years ago. One last word here about the future as far as people. There's no question in my mind that in a few years we will have a highly developed system of global television with an infinite amount of television stations to select from. I envision this to include world education, which will revolutionize our present systems, materials, and methodologies. Television is already a major part of all of our lives. We must, however, become more selective. It is time we use television instead of being used by television. Excuse me. Imagine in a few years a screen the size of your wall. You dial. You can pick up France, Germany, Spain, South Africa, whatever. You see you can't afford to travel abroad? Your traveling be right in your living room. We must strive to achieve the highest level of meaningful programming possible. We must also strive to do our best in education. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe said it the best. Wer Streben sich bemüht, den können wir erlösen. Für heute, Gott segne Sie alle. May God bless all of you.
We are running a little behind schedule, so without further introduction, Mr. Brinsfield.
Thank you, Mr. James. That means I'll have to cut mine short, right? Distinguished guests, administrators, faculty, students, and television viewing audience. Since we're only on the threshold of what will undoubtedly be a new trend in education for the 80s, we need to be aware of the future potentials of our system as it is still in a state of constant change. With the expanding use of satellite TV and computer TV link-ups, systems like ours will play a vital role within their own and surrounding communities. As an educator, becoming involved with telecommunications has been truly an eye-opening experience. To say that it has been a lot of work for those of us who've been involved with the project would really be an understatement. Yet, I believe that the preliminary work for the teachers who will follow us has already been or will be done during this remaining school year. We're still having a few technical problems, but as our system continues to evolve into a better form, these problems will be eradicated. I know you're all aware of television, the importance and impact it has on our daily lives, and like most of you, I'm a bit of a TV addict also. And I also know that we need to be concerned with just what we're watching and how we're affected by it. Since we're now living in an age when a greater need for better communication and understanding at all levels in our society is so imperative, it is my hope that our telecommunication system will serve as a vital role as a communication link between all the people of our communities. As a final note, I would like to congratulate the man who is really responsible for making our telecommunications system a reality in our schools. I'd like to go back to the word Mr. James used, that word genius. Someone once said that genius is only 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. If that's true, Mr. Lundgren, you truly are a genius. I'm sure that all of us who have been working with Mr. Lundgren for this past year can attest to the idea that if a man has a great enough want for an idea to become a reality, it'll happen. Thank you.
And to continue on that theme, Richard's learned to recognize many different connotations and meanings from that word Richard. However I might have said it, Richard responded. We went through some trials and tribulations this past 2 years, Richard and I. And I think Richard got to where he hated to hear me say that word because it always meant something. But without Richard, this Comunicasting system simply wouldn't be. Such dedication, such determination I've never seen in a person in my life. To him goes all the credit for that being here, aside from Lee Cohen and Ed Pillar. Richard, we have to hear a few words from you.
Thank you, and I'm sure there's going to be very few words. There is a song, it's entitled "To Dream the Impossible Dream." To reach for a star, I believe we have reached for that star. It is a community effort. I wish to thank the community. It is a school district effort. I wish to thank the 3 school districts involved. It is a student effort. I wish to thank the students that have been so willing to be involved in this project and give so much of their time. I feel a debt of gratitude to the community, to the school, and to the students for this opportunity. I also feel a strong obligation to carry out, to fulfill those dreams that were established so long ago. I pledge to the FCC, to Mr. Pillar, and to Dr. Cohen that we will do everything in our power to see that this system, established as a Comunicasting system, will be the best possible system for other replicated projects to follow. Thank you.
The Eagle Band will now present the selection. And for the last event in the ceremony, we have the ribbon cutting. And it is a unanimous decision that the grandfather of Comunicasting, Ed Pillar, should cut the ribbon. Thank you very much for coming. We'll have about a 15-minute social, and then we'll begin the workshop for those of you who are interested in knowing the particulars about replication of this project. Thank you.
This concludes the formal dedication of the Eagle Bend Clarissa Bertha-Hewitt telecommunicasting system. Present for the dedication ceremonies were Mr. Keith Larson, representing the Federal Communications Commission, who spoke of our station being the smallest station in the United States. He also said that the pioneer spirit of those involved in this project is to be greatly commended. He said that it is a proud moment that this model station is going to serve to aid rural education, as it has shown to already. The FCC now is in the process of deciding on the future of the low-cost, low-frequency stations, with this type of broadcasting helping to make rural TV viewing a whole new style on a more local level. Mr. Larson also told of many new FCC ideas that are helping to make all of this a reality. We also heard from Mr. Ed Pillar, who has been referred to as the grandfather of this whole system, the man that originated the idea of using TV in this manner. Mr. Pillar explained that the long process that brought us from the ideas back in the 1950s to now has been a long and often difficult process. He also warned that even though the ideas of good television are available, it's also a fear of Mr. Pillar that there may be some who are trying to use this type of broadcasting for uses that are not so good, for producing low-grade and movies and materials and placing them on the airwaves. After Mr. Pillar, we were followed by a presentation, Mr. Lee Cohen, Dr. Cohen, who is from the Case Institute in New York. Together with Mr. Pillar, helped put together the project and helped keep the FCC from allowing other commercial stations from using up all of the UHF frequencies. And Dr. Cohen, who is from the Case Research Institute, said that the Institute and the educational process is that if we are to keep up with the future, we're going to have to use the technologies of today to make sure that the whole educational field is going to stay with the new possibilities in technology in the United States today.
Held right here. We'll talk to you about replication steps you have to take right here. There is coffee and donuts over in the other building, and if any of you have not seen the facility, it's in the brown building right outside here. If you'd like to go through the studio and so on, you're welcome just to go over there and have a look.
Mr. Pillar continued that he feels that there are so many people who are in need of good education, but for one reason or another are unable to get education through the traditional process, and that this is one way that we might possibly see increases in the use of education for those who are unable to get it somewhere else. We also heard short presentations from Roland Klitsky and Larry Brinsfield, the two instructors involved in the program. Mr. Klitsky stated that he feels that the new
A revolutionary